Marcus Rivera never believed in signs from the universe. The 42-year-old geologist stood 6 feet tall with weathered hands that spoke of decades spent handling volcanic rock. His salt and pepper beard framing a face marked by sun exposure. And determination, his dark brown eyes, usually sharp with scientific curiosity, reflected something different that morning as he stared at the email that would change everything. The message from his research partner, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was brief but urgent. Mount Infernus showing unprecedented activity. Need you here immediately. This could be the discovery of our careers. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that had plagued him for weeks. His wife Sarah, a petite woman with auburn hair and worry lines that seemed to deepen, daily emerged from their kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Her green eyes searched his face with the intuition that comes from 15 years of marriage. She set his mug down gently, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his. "Another headache?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The headaches had started 3 months ago, appearing without warning and disappearing just as mysteriously. Their family doctor, Dr. Hamilton, had run every test imaginable, but the results showed nothing abnormal. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "It's nothing," Marcus lied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gestured toward his laptop screen. "Lena needs me in Guatemala. Mount Infernus is acting up, and she thinks we might be witnessing the formation of a new volcanic system." His voice carried the excitement that always accompanied talk of his work. But Sarah noticed the way his left hand unconsciously pressed against his temple. She had learned to read the subtle signs of his pain, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched when he thought she wasn't looking. Sarah moved behind his chair, her small hands working the tension from his shoulders. "You just got back from Iceland last month. Can't someone else handle this one?" Her voice carried a note of pleading that she tried to disguise as casual concern. The truth was, she had been having vivid nightmares for weeks, dreams where Marcus was trapped in a place of fire and smoke, calling her name as the ground opened beneath his feet. She never told him about these dreams, knowing he would dismiss them as stress-related anxiety. But the dreams felt too real, too specific, and they always ended the same way, with her waking up in a cold sweat. Reaching for him in the darkness, Marcus turned in his chair to face her, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, this is what we've been working toward for years. Lena thinks Mount Infernus might be connected to the ancient Mayan volcanic network. If we're right, it could revolutionize our understanding of volcanic prediction models." He paused, studying her face. "I'll only be gone for a week, 2 at most, I promise." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus felt an unusual reluctance tugging at his chest. In 20 years of volcanic research, he had never hesitated to chase a potentially groundbreaking discovery. Something about this trip felt different, though he couldn't articulate why. The headaches were getting worse, and lately, he found himself having strange moments where the world seemed to tilt slightly, as if he were standing on unstable ground even when he was on solid concrete. Sarah forced herself to nod, though every instinct screamed at her to beg him not to go. "Just promise me you'll be careful, more careful than usual." She reached up to touch the small scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a close call with falling volcanic debris in Italy. 5 years earlier, "I can't lose you, Marcus. Not now." The next morning brought the first sign that perhaps this trip was cursed from the beginning. Marcus had packed meticulously the night before, organizing his specialized equipment with the precision of someone whose life might depend on having the right tool at the right moment. His seismic detection devices, temperature-resistant cameras, and gas analysis equipment were secured in impact-resistant cases that had traveled with him to volcanoes across 6 continents. But when he reached for his passport from the bedroom, safe where it always lived, his fingers found only empty space. "Sarah," he called, his voice carrying an edge of panic. She appeared in the doorway, still in her silk pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep. "My passport. It's not in the safe." Together, they tore through the house, checking every drawer, every pocket, every possible hiding place. The passport had simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all. By the time they found it 3 hours later, tucked inexplicably between. The pages of a cookbook that Sarah hadn't opened in months. Marcus had already missed his original flight. The airline representative, a nasal-voiced woman named Carol, who seemed to take personal pleasure in delivering bad news, informed him that the next available flight to Guatemala City wouldn't depart for another 6 hours. "And that's only if the weather holds," she added ominously. Glancing toward the airport windows, where dark clouds were gathering with unusual speed, Marcus paced the departure lounge like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried to reach Elena. Her phone went straight to voicemail each time, unusual for someone who typically answered on the first ring. The recorded message played in his ear repeatedly. "You've reached Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm currently in the field and may be out of cellular range. Leave a message, and I'll return your call as soon as possible." Something about her voice sounded strained. It's different from the confident researcher he had known for 8 years. As the hours dragged by, Marcus became increasingly aware of the other passengers sharing his delayed fate. There was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, who kept muttering prayers in Mandarin while clutching a jade pendant. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she spoke, and her dark eyes darted nervously toward the windows whenever thunder rumbled in the distance. Across from him sat James Morrison, a pale, thin man in his 30s, with nervous energy that manifested in constant leg bouncing and knuckle cracking. James wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the casual atmosphere of the departure lounge, and he kept checking his watch with increasing agitation. "Traveling to Guatemala on business?" Marcus asked, attempting to make conversation to distract himself from his growing unease. James looked up with startled blue eyes, as if he had been lost in thought. "Photography assignment," he replied tersely. "Volcanic landscapes for National Geographic." "You? Research?" Marcus answered, studying the younger man's face. There was something haunted about James's expression, something that went beyond simple travel anxiety. "Mount Infernus specifically? Are you familiar with the area?" James's face went pale, and his hand unconsciously moved to his throat. "I've been having dreams about that place for months. Fire and ash and people screaming." He laughed nervously, a sound that didn't match the fear in his eyes. "Crazy, right? I've never even been to Guatemala before, but I keep dreaming about this specific mountain. When the assignment came up, I almost turned it down, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to dispel troubling thoughts. Before Marcus could respond, the departure board finally updated with their gate assignment. The flight to Guatemala City was boarding, 6 hours behind schedule. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Mrs. Chen approached Marcus with hesitant steps. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. "You should not go to the mountain," she said in heavily accented English. "The spirits are angry. I can feel it in the air, in the way the birds fly, in the color of the sunset last night. Turn back while you still can." Marcus wanted to dismiss her words as the superstitions of an elderly woman, but something in her eyes gave him pause.
Oh.
She spoke with the conviction of someone who had witnessed things that couldn't be explained by science. Before he could ask what she meant, she had disappeared into the crowd of boarding passengers, leaving behind only the faint scent of jasmine and an inexplicable chill in the air. The flight to Guatemala City was turbulent beyond anything Marcus had experienced in hundreds of flights. The aircraft bucked and rolled through storm clouds that seemed to have materialized from nowhere, defying weather forecasts that had predicted clear skies. Flight attendants struggled to maintain their footing as they moved through the cabin, their professional smiles strained by obvious concern. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom with increasing frequency, offering reassurances that sounded less convincing each time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected weather patterns over the Gulf of Mexico. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We're working to find a smoother altitude." The captain's voice carried a tension that experienced travelers recognized immediately. This wasn't routine turbulence. Marcus gripped his armrest as the plane dropped suddenly, his stomach lurching with the violent motion. Around him, passengers prayed in multiple languages, their voices creating a strange harmony of fear and hope. James Morrison, seated 2 rows ahead, had gone completely white and was gripping his camera bag as if it were a life preserver. Mrs. Chen sat serenely in her window seat, her eyes closed and lips moving in silent prayer, seemingly unaffected by the chaos surrounding her. As they approached Guatemala City, the turbulence mysteriously ceased, leaving behind an eerie calm that felt more unsettling than the storm they had just endured. The city sprawled below them, a mixture of modern buildings and colonial architecture shrouded in an unusual atmospheric haze that made the landscape appear dreamlike and slightly out of focus. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks obscured by what looked like volcanic emissions, though the meteorological reports had indicated no current eruptions in the region. The customs process in Guatemala City moved with bureaucratic slowness that tested Marcus's patience. The official who examined his passport, a heavyset man with suspicious eyes named Rodriguez, seemed determined to find some irregularity in his documentation. Purpose of visit? Rodriguez asked in English, tinged with a thick accent. Scientific. Research, Marcus replied, producing his university credentials and research permits. Volcanic geology study of Mount Infernus. Rodriguez's expression changed immediately, morphing from routine suspicion to something approaching alarm. He studied Marcus's face intently, as if trying to memorize his features. Mount Infernus is very dangerous now, Senator. Perhaps you should consider a different research location. The indigenous people have been reporting strange phenomena for weeks. Animals fleeing the area, unusual ground vibrations, changes in local water sources. That's exactly why I need to be there, Marcus explained patiently. These changes could indicate significant volcanic activity. My research could help predict and potentially prevent a catastrophic eruption. Rodriguez shook his head slowly, his expression grave. Some things cannot be prevented, only survived. My grandmother used to tell stories about that mountain, about times when the earth itself rebels against those who disturb its peace. He stamped Marcus's passport with obvious reluctance. Be very careful, Dr. Rivera, and leave at the first sign of danger, no matter what your scientific curiosity tells you. The taxi ride from the airport to his hotel provided Marcus's first real glimpse of the city's current state. His driver, a cheerful man named Diego, with calloused hands and a quick smile, navigated the crowded streets with practiced ease while providing a running commentary on local conditions. You picked an interesting time to visit Guatemala, Dr. Diego said, glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. The last few weeks have been unusual. Unusual how? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Small earthquakes every day, but not the regular kind we're used to. These feel different, more aggressive. And the animals have been acting like they know something we don't. Dogs howling all night, birds flying in circles for hours, cattle refusing to graze in certain areas. Diego paused to navigate around a bus, belching black smoke. My wife thinks it's the end times. She's been making me take her to church every morning for 2 weeks. As they drove deeper into the city, Marcus noticed the subtle signs of a population on edge. Store owners stood in their doorways, scanning the sky with worried expressions. Children played in the streets, but their games seemed subdued, lacking the carefree energy typical of young people. Even the vendors hawking their wares did so with less enthusiasm than usual, their voices carrying an undertone of anxiety that spoke to some collective unease. The hotel lobby was nearly empty when Marcus checked in, unusual for what was typically the busy season for tourists and researchers. The desk clerk, a young woman named Maria with tired eyes and nervous fingers, processed his registration with mechanical efficiency. Will you be staying long, Dr. Rivera? She asked, though her tone suggested she hoped the answer would be no. About a week, Marcus replied. I'm here to study Mount Infernus. Can you arrange transportation to the base camp area? Maria's hands stopped moving on the keyboard, and she looked up at him with genuine concern. Sir, I must tell you that several tour companies have stopped offering trips to that area. The guides are refusing to go there no matter how much money they're offered. They say the mountain is angry and that it's not safe for outsiders. Marcus felt his scientific skepticism warring with a growing sense of unease that he couldn't quite explain. Surely there must be someone willing to make the trip. I can pay well for reliable transportation. Maria hesitated, then leaned closer to speak in a lower voice. There is one man, Carlos Mendoza, has been guiding people to the volcanic regions. For 30 years, he knows the mountains better than anyone, but she paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. He has been acting strange lately. Some people say he's been having visions, dreams about the mountain calling to him. Family is worried, but he insists on continuing to work. As Marcus settled into his hotel room that evening, he tried once again to reach Elena. Her phone continued going directly to voicemail, and her research team's satellite phone was apparently out of service. The lack of communication was becoming genuinely concerning, as Elena was known for her meticulous attention to safety protocols and regular check-ins with the university. Their partnership had been built on mutual trust and shared passion for volcanic research. But it had also been founded on an absolute commitment to keeping each other informed of their status and location at all times. He spread his topographical maps of the Mount Infernus region across the small hotel desk, studying the terrain they would need to traverse to reach Elena's last known research site. The mountain rose from the surrounding landscape like a sleeping giant, its slopes marked with old lava flows and secondary crater formations that told the story of thousands of years of violent geological activity. According to the most recent geological surveys, Mount Infernus had been dormant for over 2 centuries, showing none of the warning signs typically associated with volcanic reactivation. But as Marcus traced the contour lines with his finger, he noticed something that the maps couldn't convey, a sense of anticipation that seemed to emanate from the very paper. The rational part of his mind recognized this as projection, his own anxiety manifesting as supernatural nonsense. Yet the feeling persisted, a low-level dread that made his hands shake slightly as he planned his route to the mountain. Outside his hotel window, the city of Guatemala settled into an uneasy night, while somewhere in the distance, Mount Infernus waited in the darkness, its ancient heart beginning to stir with a rhythm that had been silent for far too long. Dawn broke over Guatemala City, with an unsettling crimson hue that photographer James Morrison captured from his hotel balcony 3 floors below Marcus's room. The sky bled red and orange in patterns that defied normal atmospheric phenomena, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. James lowered his camera with trembling hands, his blue eyes wide, with the recognition that he had seen this exact sky in his recurring nightmares. Every detail matched perfectly, the way the clouds swirled in spiral formations, the particular shade of amber that dominated the horizon, even the strange quality of light that made everything appear slightly out of focus. Marcus emerged from the hotel lobby at precisely 7 in the morning to find Carlos Mendoza waiting beside a battered Toyota pickup truck that had clearly seen better decades. Carlos stood 5 feet 8 inches tall, with the compact, weathered build of a man who had spent his life navigating difficult terrain. His face was deeply lined from years of sun exposure, and his black hair streaked with premature gray, pulled back in a practical ponytail. But it was his eyes that gave Marcus's pause, dark brown orbs that seemed to hold secrets and carried an intensity that suggested Carlos saw more than most people were comfortable acknowledging. Dr. Rivera? Carlos extended a calloused hand that gripped with surprising strength. I am Carlos Mendoza. Maria at the hotel says you need to reach Mount Infernus. His English was heavily accented but precise, each word carefully chosen. I must tell you, doctor, that many people have asked me to refuse this job. My wife, my children, even the priest at our church. They think I am becoming, how do you say, obsessed with the mountain. Marcus studied the guide's face, noting the slight tremor in Carlos's left hand and the way his eyes occasionally darted toward the horizon where Mount Infernus lay hidden behind layers of morning mist. Are you obsessed with it, Carlos? Was quiet for a long moment, loading Marcus's equipment into the truck bed with practiced efficiency. For 30 years, I have guided people to volcanoes across Guatemala and Honduras. I have seen Pacaya during minor eruptions, climbed Akatanongo when the gases were so thick they burned your throat just to breathe. But Mount Infernus paused, securing the equipment with rope that his hands tied automatically, while his mind seemed elsewhere. 3 weeks ago, I started having dreams about climbing that mountain. Not normal dreams, Doctor. Dreams where I could feel the heat through the soles of my boots, smell sulfur so strong it made my eyes water, hear voices calling from inside the crater, and in every dream there was a man trapped on the mountain, calling for help. The description sent an unexpected chill down Marcus's spine, but he forced himself to respond with scientific rationality. Dreams can feel very real when we're stressed or anxious about something. The recent seismic activity has probably affected everyone in the region psychologically. Carlos turned to face him directly, his dark eyes intense with conviction. Dr. Rivera, in my dreams, the man who was trapped, he looked exactly like you. Before Marcus could process this revelation fully, James Morrison appeared from the hotel entrance, dragging 2 large camera cases and wearing the same expensive suit from the previous day, now wrinkled from a restless night. His pale face showed signs of insomnia, with dark circles under his blue eyes and a nervous energy that manifested in constant movement. "Excuse me," James called out, approaching their truck. "I couldn't help but overhear that you're heading to Mount Infernus. I'm James Morrison, photographer. Would it be possible to share transportation? I can pay my share of the costs." Carlos and Marcus exchanged glances, and Marcus could see the recognition in the guide's expression. This was clearly the photographer Carlos had been expecting, though how he could have known about James remained unexplained. "The more people who witness what happens today, the better," Carlos said cryptically, helping James load his equipment alongside Marcus's scientific instruments. The drive from Guatemala City toward Mount Infernus took them through increasingly rural landscapes that seemed to grow more desolate with each passing mile. Villages that should have been bustling with morning activity stood eerily quiet, with many homes showing signs of hasty abandonment. Livestock pens sat empty, their gates hanging open, as if the animals had been released to find safety elsewhere. Even the typically vibrant markets that dotted the roadside were closed, their colorful awnings folded and stalls secured against some anticipated catastrophe. "Where is everyone?" James asked, his camera clicking constantly as he documented the strange emptiness of the countryside. His professional instincts were kicking in, but Marcus could see the underlying fear in his movements, the way his hands shook slightly when he wasn't actively taking pictures. "The indigenous people have old stories about Mount Infernus," Carlos explained, navigating around a fallen tree that blocked half the road. "They say that when the mountain begins to wake up, those who are wise leave the area immediately. Not just when it erupts, when it begins to wake up. There are signs that only those who have lived here for generations know how to read. If summoned by his words, they encountered their first human presence since leaving the main highway. An elderly woman sat beside the road, her weathered brown face marked by deep lines of worry and her gray hair braided with colorful ribbons that seemed incongruously cheerful against the desolate landscape. She raised her hand as they approached, and Carlos immediately pulled over, recognizing her as someone deserving of respect and attention. The woman approached Carlos's window and spoke rapidly in a mixture of Spanish, what Marcus assumed was an indigenous language. Her voice carried urgent authority, and her dark eyes kept darting toward Mount Infernus, which was now visible in the distance as an imposing silhouette against the troubled sky. Carlos listened intently, occasionally, asking questions in the same linguistic mixture, his expression growing increasingly grave with each exchange. "What is she saying?" Marcus asked, when the conversation finally ended and the woman had continued on her way. Walking with surprising speed despite her apparent age, Carlos was quiet for several minutes as he restarted the truck and continued their journey. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Her name is Esperanza. She is a curandera, a traditional healer, and she has been having visions for weeks. She says the mountain is not just waking up, it is angry. Specifically angry about something that was taken from it, something that needs to be returned." "What kind of something?" James asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. She was not specific, but she mentioned caves beneath the mountain where ancient rituals were performed. places where the boundary between our world and the spirit world grows thin. She said that recent disturbances to these sacred sites have upset the balance, and now the mountain seeks to restore that balance through fire and ash. Carlos paused to navigate a particularly rough section of road. She also said that 3 men would come to the mountain today, and only 1 would leave unchanged. The landscape around them began to change dramatically as they climbed toward higher elevations. The lush vegetation of the lower altitudes gave way to scrubby bushes and eventually to bare rock formations that showed clear signs of past volcanic activity. Old lava flows created strange sculptures in the landscape, twisted formations that looked almost like frozen screams emerging from the earth itself. The air grew thinner and carried an unusual metallic taste that made Marcus's throat feel scratchy, despite the lack of visible volcanic emissions. At an elevation of approximately 8,000 feet, they encountered the first unmistakable signs that Mount Infernus was indeed awakening from its centuries-long slumber. A series of small craters, previously filled with rainwater and vegetation, now emitted steady streams of sulfurous gas that created shimmering heat distortions in the air. The temperature around these vents was noticeably higher than the surrounding area, and Marcus's handheld instruments registered gas compositions that indicated significant underground thermal activity. "This is not supposed to be happening," Marcus muttered, taking readings with equipment that had been specifically calibrated for detecting early volcanic warning signs. According to every geological survey conducted in the last 50 years, Mount Infernus shows no indication of active magma chambers. "The gas compositions I'm reading suggest active volcanism, but the depth calculations don't make sense." Carlos parked the truck beside what appeared to be an abandoned research camp, its tents still standing but showing signs of hasty evacuation. Scientific equipment lay scattered around the campsite, some of it still running and collecting data. Despite the absence of researchers, Marcus immediately recognized Elena's portable seismic station, its digital display showing a pattern of underground activity that made his blood run cold. The readings indicated massive movement of molten rock at depths that conventional geology suggested should be solid mantle. "Elena," Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the rocky walls of the natural amphitheater where the camp was situated. There was no response, except for the steady hissing of gas vents and a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep underground. He moved through the abandoned camp methodically, checking each tent and equipment station for clues about what had happened to his research partner and her team in Elena's personal tent. Marcus found her field notebook lying open to the final entry, dated 3 days earlier. Her handwriting, normally precise and controlled, showed clear signs of agitation in the increasingly erratic script. The entry read, "Day 12. Underground activity increasing exponentially. Seismic patterns unlike anything in the literature. Team members reporting shared dreams about voices calling from beneath the mountain. Rodriguez and Kim have requested immediate evacuation. I cannot leave. Not when we're so close to a breakthrough. The mountain is trying to tell us something, and I think I'm beginning to understand what it is. If something happens to me, tell Marcus that the answers are in the old cave system beneath the crater. The one marked on the 1847 expedition maps, that everyone assumed were mythology." James had been documenting the abandoned camp with his camera, but now he approached Marcus with obvious concern. "There's something you need to see," he said, his voice tight with controlled fear. He led Marcus to the eastern edge of the camp, where the ground sloped upward toward Mount Infernus itself. "Look at the rock formations here." Did they remind you of anything? Marcus studied the area James was indicating and felt his scientific skepticism begin to crumble. The rock formations were arranged in patterns that matched exactly the landscape from James's photographs, the ones he claimed to have dreamed about for months. Before ever seeing this place, natural geological processes could not have created such specific, complex arrangements that matched a photographer's dreams with perfect accuracy. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, but even as he spoke the words, he was forced to confront evidence that challenged everything he thought he understood about the relationship between human consciousness and geological phenomena. Carlos had been exploring the perimeter of the camp and now returned with news that added another layer of mystery to their situation. The road ahead has been blocked by a recent rock slide, he reported. We cannot drive any closer to the mountain. From here, we must climb on foot if we want to reach the crater area where your friend was conducting her research. The climbing trail that led from the research camp toward Mount Infernus's crater had clearly been used recently, but not by the original research team. Fresh footprints in the volcanic soil showed that at least one person had made this journey within the last 24 hours, climbing toward the mountain despite the increasing signs of volcanic activity. The footprints were large, suggesting a man of significant size, and the depth of the impressions indicated someone carrying heavy equipment or supplies as they began their ascent. Following the mysterious footprints up the increasingly steep trail, the signs of underground thermal activity became impossible to ignore. Steam vents appeared with greater frequency, some of them hot enough to scald exposed skin if approached too closely. The ground beneath their feet felt warm even through thick hiking boots, and occasional tremors caused loose rocks to cascade down the slopes around them. Dr. Rivera Carlos said during a rest stop about halfway to the crater rim, "There is something I have not told you about my dreams." His dark eyes were fixed on the summit above them, where clouds of steam were beginning to gather in patterns that suggested significant underground pressure building toward release. In every dream, I climb this exact trail, following these exact footprints, and I find a man trapped in a cave beneath the crater. But in my dreams, when I try to help him escape, the mountain becomes angry and begins to erupt. The only way to save him is to give the mountain what it wants, but I never understand what that is until it's too late. James stopped taking pictures and stared at Carlos with obvious alarm. In my dreams, I'm the one taking pictures when the mountain erupts. I keep shooting even as the lava flows toward me because I know the photos are important somehow. And there's always a man calling for help from somewhere below ground, but I can never find him in time. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude, as he realized that all three of their dreams involved the same basic scenario: a man trapped beneath Mount Infernus during a volcanic eruption. The rational part of his mind insisted that this was simply coincidence, shared anxiety manifesting in similar symbolic dreams. But the evidence of James's photographic precognition and Carlos's uncannily accurate predictions made such rational explanations increasingly difficult to maintain. The final approach to Mount Infernus's crater rim required technical climbing, skills that tested all three men to their limits. The volcanic rock was sharp and unstable. It's prone to breaking away without warning and sending climbers scrambling for new handholds. The air grew thinner with each step, and the metallic taste that had been mild at lower elevations now dominated every breath. Marcus's specialized gas detection equipment was registering levels of sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide that should have been causing serious respiratory distress. Yet all three men seemed to be breathing normally, despite the toxic atmospheric conditions. At 4:30 in the afternoon, they reached the crater rim of Mount Infernus and encountered a sight that defied every principle of volcanic geology that Marcus had learned in 2 decades of research. The crater, which should have been a simple depression carved by ancient explosive eruptions, was instead a complex system of terraces and chambers that descended far deeper than any conventional crater formation. Steam rose from multiple points within the crater, and the sound of underground water movement echoed from depths that seemed to extend far into the mountain's core. But most disturbing of all was the evidence of recent human activity within the crater itself. A rope had been anchored to the rim and descended into the misty depths below, its fibers still showing signs of recent use. Beside the anchor point, someone had carved symbols into the volcanic rock, symbols that Marcus didn't recognize, but that made Carlos step backward with obvious fear. "Those markings," Carlos whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of escaping steam. "They are from the old religion, the one practiced here before the Spanish came. They are calling symbols used to communicate with the spirits that live beneath the mountain." He paused, studying the carvings more closely. Someone has been asking the mountain to wake up, and it appears that the mountain has been listening. Raised his camera to document the mysterious symbols, but as soon as his finger pressed the shutter release, The ground beneath their feet began to tremble with increasing intensity. What started as a minor vibration quickly escalated into a genuine earthquake that forced all three men to grab onto whatever stable handholds they could find to avoid being thrown from the narrow crater rim. From somewhere deep within Mount Infernus came a sound unlike anything Marcus had ever heard in his extensive experience with volcanic phenomena. A deep, resonant note that seemed almost musical in its complexity, as if the mountain itself were singing in a voice that predated human language. The song grew louder and more insistent, and with each crescendo, tremors beneath their feet increased in intensity. And then, carried on the sulphurous wind that rose from the crater's depths, came the unmistakable sound of a human voice calling for help. Marcus felt his heart stop as he recognized the voice cutting through the mountain's supernatural song. "Elena?" shouted into the crater, his voice echoing off the terraced walls before being swallowed by the ascending steam. The response came immediately, weak but unmistakably, his research partner's voice, calling from somewhere far below, in the maze of volcanic chambers. Marcus, thank God, trapped in the lower cave system. The entrance collapsed 2 days ago, and the water level is rising. Elena's voice carried the strain of someone who had been rationing both energy and hope. For far too long, thermal activity is increasing rapidly down here. I don't think I have much time left. James Morrison's camera clicked frantically as he documented what would become some of the most extraordinary photographs ever taken of pre-eruption volcanic activity. Through his lens, he captured the exact moment when Mount Infernus transitioned. From dormant geological formation to active threat, the steam patterns shifting from random emissions to organized columns that spoke of massive pressure building beneath the surface. But even as his professional instincts drove him to document everything, his recurring nightmares played out in perfect detail around him, each element matching his dreams with terrifying precision. Carlos Mendoza studied the rope that descended into the crater with the experienced eye of someone who had guided climbers through challenging terrain for 3 decades. The rope was military-grade climbing cord, professionally anchored and showing signs of recent use by someone who understood proper safety protocols. "This rope will hold," he announced, testing the anchor points with sharp tugs that would have revealed any structural weakness. "But whoever went down before us, they have not come back up. Either they found another way out, or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. All three men understood that the most likely explanation was that the mysterious previous climber had met the same fate that now threatened Elena, trapped in the increasingly unstable cave system beneath Mount Infernus as the mountain prepared for its first eruption in over 2 centuries. Marcus began checking his equipment with the methodical precision of someone whose life might depend on having the right tools in the right places. His headlamp was fully charged, his emergency radio was functioning properly, his gas detection instruments were calibrated for the toxic environment he was about to enter. But as he prepared for the descent, the headaches that had been plaguing him for months suddenly intensified to a level that made him stumble and grab onto James's shoulder for support. "Dr. Rivera, are you all right?" James asked, his pale face showing genuine concern despite his own obvious fear about the situation developing around them. "Just a headache," Marcus lied, though the pain was now so intense that white spots appeared at the edges of his vision. The headaches had been getting progressively worse during the entire trip, as if proximity to Mount Infernus was triggering some kind of neurological response. For a moment, he wondered if the mountain's geological activity was affecting him on a physical level, perhaps through electromagnetic fields or infrasonic vibrations that conventional science didn't yet understand. Carlos was studying the carved symbols beside the rope anchor with increasing agitation, his weathered face showing recognition and fear in equal measure. "Dr. Rivera, these symbols, they are not just calling symbols, they are binding symbols, used in the old rituals to trap spirits within sacred places. Someone has been using ancient knowledge to bind something powerful to this mountain, and now it is trying to break free." Before Marcus could ask for clarification, another tremor shook the crater rim, this one strong enough to send loose rocks cascading into the depths below. The sound of Elena's voice rose from the crater again. but now it carried a note of panic that made clear her situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Marcus, the water is up to my waist now, and it's getting hotter. There are passages down here that aren't on any of the geological surveys. This whole mountain is hollow." Marcus knew he was facing a decision that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. Every scientific instinct told him that descending into an active volcanic system was tantamount to suicide, that the responsible action would be to call for professional rescue services and wait for proper equipment and expertise. But Elena's increasingly desperate calls from below made clear that she didn't have time for responsible decisions. Mountain was awakening with accelerating violence, and whatever was happening in the cave system beneath the crater was happening now. "I'm going down," Marcus announced, clipping his safety harness to the rope and testing his equipment one final time. "Carlos, can you maintain radio contact from up here? If the situation deteriorates beyond recovery, document everything and get word back to the university about what we found." Carlos nodded grimly, but his dark eyes held the look of someone who had already seen how this story ended. "In my dreams, this is exactly when the mountain becomes angry. When someone tries to take back what it has claimed." He paused, studying Marcus's face intently. "But in my dreams, I also saw that the only way to calm the mountain's anger is to give it something of equal value in return. I think I understand now what that means." James Morrison positioned himself at the optimal angle to photograph Marcus's descent into the crater. His camera already configured for the low-light conditions they expected to encounter in the volcanic cave system. But as he looked through his viewfinder at the scene unfolding before him, he realized that his nightmares had shown him not just the broad outline of these events, but specific details that were now proving prophetically accurate. The way the steam rose in spiral patterns, the exact positioning of Marcus's equipment, even the particular shade of orange light that filtered through the volcanic gases, all of it matched his dreams with impossible precision. The descent into Mount Infernus's crater was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in 20 years of volcanic research. The rope carried him down through layers of geological time, past evidence of eruptions that had occurred at regular intervals over millennia, each layer telling the story of the mountain's violent past. But more disturbing than the geological evidence were the signs of recent human activity at various levels within the crater. Additional ropes hung from metal anchors that had been professionally installed, creating a network of access routes that suggested someone had been exploring these depths systematically over an extended period. At a depth of approximately 200 feet, Marcus encountered the first of the cave entrances that Elena had mentioned. The opening was large enough for a person to crawl through. Warm air flowing from within carried the sound of running water and Elena's voice calling for help. But the entrance also showed clear signs of recent collapse, with fresh volcanic rock blocking what had once been a larger passage. Someone had been digging through the debris, creating a narrow tunnel that would barely accommodate a person of Marcus's size. "Elena, I'm at the cave entrance. I can hear you, but the passage is partially blocked. I'm going to try to dig through." Marcus's voice echoed in the narrow confines of the tunnel as he used his climbing tools to clear away loose rock and volcanic debris. Each piece he moved revealed more evidence of the systematic excavation that had preceded his arrival, tool marks in the rock, precisely placed support beams, and a level of engineering that suggested professional mining experience as he worked. Marcus became increasingly aware of the unusual acoustic properties of the cave system. Elena's voice seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the sound were being reflected and amplified by chamber configurations that defied conventional understanding of how caves were formed. More disturbing still, began to hear other voices mixed with Elena's whispered conversations in languages he didn't recognize, and occasionally what sounded like ritualistic chanting that seemed to originate from somewhere much deeper. Within the mountain, the breakthrough came suddenly, with a cascade of loose rock that opened a passage wide enough for Marcus to squeeze through into the cave system proper. The chamber he entered was far larger than any natural cave formation should have been at this elevation, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness above and water-carved passages leading off in multiple directions, bioluminescent minerals. In the cave walls provided an eerie blue-green glow that made the entire space feel otherworldly, like something from another planet rather than a terrestrial geological formation. Marcus. Over here. Elena's voice came from a passage to his left, and he could now see the glow of her headlamp reflecting off wet rock surfaces. As he made his way toward her location, Marcus realized that the cave system was even more extensive than Elena's voice had suggested. Passages branched off in all directions, some leading upward toward other crater entrances, others descending deeper into the mountain's core. The sound of running water was everywhere, but it was the wrong kind of water, too warm, too mineral-rich. In carrying dissolved gases that made the air shimmer with heat distortion, he found Elena trapped in a natural chamber that had become a deadly pool as rising groundwater, heated by increasing volcanic activity, threatened to cook her alive. Dr. Elena Vasquez, normally an imposing figure at 5 feet 10 inches, with the athletic build of someone who climbed volcanoes for a living, now appeared small and vulnerable. As she clung to a rock ledge with water up to her chest, her dark hair was plastered to her head with a mixture of sweat and mineral-rich steam, and her brown eyes showed the strain of someone who had been fighting for survival for days. "Thank God you're here," Elena gasped as Marcus waded into the increasingly hot water toward her position. "I found something down here, Marcus. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about volcanic systems. This isn't a natural cave system. It's artificial. Someone built these chambers thousands of years ago, and they built them for a specific purpose." As Marcus worked to free Elena from the rock crevice where she had become trapped, she continued her explanation in the rapid, urgent tone of someone who knew she might not have another opportunity to share crucial information. The water level rises and falls on a precise schedule, not randomly like it should in a natural system. Someone engineered this place to flood and drain according to some kind of pattern. And Marcus, there are artifacts down here, stone carvings, metal objects, things that predate any known civilization in this region. The rescue itself proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. Elena's left leg was pinned beneath a fallen rock that required careful leverage to move without causing further injury or triggering additional rockfall. As he worked with his climbing tools to create enough space for her to escape, the water level continued rising at an alarming rate, and the temperature increased to the point where both of them were beginning to show signs of heat exhaustion. But the most disturbing discovery came when Marcus's headlamp illuminated the chamber walls during his rescue efforts. The rock surfaces were covered with carvings that matched exactly the symbols Carlos had identified beside the crater rim, binding symbols from pre-Columbian religious practices. But these carvings were far more extensive and detailed, creating complex patterns that seemed to tell a story about rituals performed in this exact location over many centuries. "Elena, these carvings, how long have they been here?" Marcus asked, as he finally managed to free her from the rock trap. "That's what I was trying to figure out when the cave entrance collapsed," Elena replied, supporting herself against Marcus as they began making their way toward the passage that led back to the crater rim. Carbon dating on organic material trapped in the carvings suggests they're at least 800 years old. But the style and complexity indicate a much longer tradition. "Marcus, I think this mountain has been used for human sacrifice rituals for over a millennium, and I think someone is trying to revive those practices." As they struggled through the partially flooded passages toward the exit tunnel, Elena shared the most disturbing discovery of her research. 2 days ago, I found evidence that someone had been performing modern versions of the ancient rituals down here. Fresh offerings, recently burned materials, and she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Blood, Marcus. Fresh human blood on the altar stones." The climb back toward the crater rim should have been straightforward, but Mount Infernus had other plans. As Marcus and Elena ascended the rope system that Carlos and James were monitoring from above, the mountain began showing signs of imminent eruption that sent both men into a state of controlled panic. The ground tremors increased in frequency and intensity, creating a rhythm that seemed almost like a massive heartbeat accelerating toward cardiac arrest. Halfway up the rope, Lena suddenly stopped climbing and looked back toward the cave system. They had just escaped. "Marcus, listen. Do you hear that?" Her voice carried a note of scientific excitement that seemed incongruous given their desperate situation. "The mountain's vibrations, they're not random. They're following the same pattern as the flooding cycles in the cave system. Someone designed this entire volcanic system to operate according to human-controlled timing. Before Marcus could respond to this revelation, the rope supporting Elena's weight suddenly went slack. Looking up toward the crater rim, I could see Carlos and James gesturing frantically and pointing toward something behind the two climbers. Marcus turned to look over his shoulder and felt his blood freeze at what he saw emerging from the depths of Mount Infernus. A column of superheated gas and volcanic debris was rising from the crater's deepest chambers, creating a pyroclastic flow that would reach their position within minutes. The mountain was not just awakening, it was exploding with a violence that hadn't been seen in this region for centuries. But more terrifying than the approaching destruction was the realization that the eruption was following exactly the same pattern that James Morrison had been photographing in his prophetic nightmares for months. Climb. Climb now. Carlos's voice carried down from the crater rim. But it was already clear that conventional climbing speed would not be sufficient. To escape the approaching pyroclastic flow, the superheated gas and debris moved with the speed of an avalanche, consuming everything in its path and leaving only sterilized rock in its wake. Marcus felt the familiar pain of his chronic headaches suddenly intensify to a level that made consciousness itself seem fragile. But instead of hindering his escape efforts, the pain seemed to bring with it a strange clarity about the mountain's behavior patterns. He found himself understanding intuitively which passages would offer protection from the approaching flow, which rock formations would provide stable handholds, and even which timing would allow them to move between safe positions as the eruption developed. This way, Marcus called to Elena, abandoning the rope system, and instead leading her toward a series of natural ledges that his newfound intuition told him would provide a safer route to the surface. As they moved, he realized that his months of headaches had not been random neurological events. They had been his brain, adapting to perceive the electromagnetic and infrasonic signals that Mount Infernus had been broadcasting as it prepared. For Eruption, the final ascent to the crater rim became a race against geological forces that dwarfed human strength and ingenuity. Behind them, Mount Infernus roared with the voice of awakening Earth, sending pyroclastic flows cascading through the cave system they had just escaped and launching volcanic bombs high into the atmosphere. The air itself became a weapon, superheated, to temperatures that could kill with a single breath. But as Marcus pulled Elena over the crater rim to safety, he realized that their escape from the mountain's depths was only the beginning of their fight for survival. Mount Infernus was not finished with them yet, and the most dangerous part of their ordeal was still to come. The scene that greeted them on the crater rim defied every principle of volcanic eruption that Marcus had studied in his 20-year career. Instead of the chaotic, random violence typical of natural volcanic events, Mount Infernus was erupting with an almost choreographed precision that spoke of intelligent design rather than geological accident. Lava fountains rose and fell in synchronized patterns. Pyroclastic flows followed predetermined paths that avoided certain areas while devastating others. And the very timing of each explosive event seemed calculated to create maximum impact. While leaving specific escape routes temporarily clear, James Morrison stood at the crater's edge, his camera capturing images that would later be studied by volcanologists worldwide as the first photographic evidence of artificially controlled volcanic eruption. His pale face showed a mixture of terror and vindication as he watched his recurring nightmares play out in perfect detail around him. "It's exactly like my dreams," he called, over the roar of escaping gases and falling volcanic debris. Every single detail down to the way the lava flows spiral counterclockwise and the timing. Between the major explosions, Carlos Mendoza had moved to a position where he could observe the entire mountainside, his weathered face grim with recognition as he watched evacuation patterns that matched traditional indigenous knowledge about Mount Infernus's behavior during historical eruptions. "This is not the first time," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of generations of inherited wisdom. "My grandfather told stories about eruptions that followed patterns, eruptions that could be predicted and survived if you knew the old ways. The mountain has been controlled for centuries, but never with this level of precision. Elena struggled to her feet despite obvious exhaustion and heat-related stress. Her scientific mind processing the impossible evidence unfolding around them. Marcus, look at the lava flow patterns. They're avoiding the areas where we found the ritual sites, but they're systematically destroying everything else. Someone is using this eruption to clear the mountainside while preserving the ancient sacred locations. As if summoned by her words, a figure emerged from the smoke and steam. On the opposite side of the crater rim, the man was tall and powerfully built, perhaps 50 years old. With the kind of weathered skin that spoke of a lifetime spent in harsh outdoor conditions, his black hair was streaked with silver and pulled back in a traditional style, and his dark eyes held an intensity that seemed to reflect the volcanic fires erupting around him. He wore modern hiking gear mixed with what appeared to be traditional ceremonial elements, metal bracers inscribed with symbols that matched the cave carvings, and a necklace of volcanic glass that caught and reflected the orange glow of the eruption. "Dr. Rivera," the stranger called across the crater, his voice somehow carrying clearly despite the volcanic cacophony surrounding them. "I am Dr. Alejandro Xumuc, and I have been waiting for you to arrive. Your presence here completes the final stage of a process that began 800 years ago." Marcus felt his enhanced perception of the mountain's electromagnetic patterns suddenly intensify, as if Dr. Xumuc's presence had somehow amplified his ability to sense the volcanic system's artificial control mechanisms. Through this heightened awareness, he could perceive the vast network of sensors, triggers, and redirection systems that had been built into Mount Infernus over centuries of careful engineering. The mountain was not just controlled, it was a massive machine designed to appear natural while serving specific human purposes. "You're the one who's been performing the rituals," Elena accused, her voice carrying the anger of someone who had nearly died as a result of Xumuc's actions. "You triggered this eruption deliberately, knowing that people would be trapped in the cave system." Dr. Xumuc smiled with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages in a deadly situation. "You misunderstand the nature of sacrifice. The mountain requires offerings to maintain the delicate balance that keeps its full power in check. Without regular feeding, Mount Infernus would erupt with enough violence to devastate the entire Central American region. The few lives lost in controlled eruptions prevent the deaths of millions in an uncontrolled catastrophe." James Morrison continued photographing the confrontation while positioning himself to document what was clearly building toward a final showdown between modern science and ancient power. Through his camera lens, he could see details that his naked eye missed, subtle hand signals that Dr. Xumuc was making toward hidden positions around the crater rim, suggesting that he was not alone in his control of the situation. "There are others," James called out, his voice tight with fear. "At least 6 people positioned around the crater, all of them carrying what looks like electronic equipment." The revelation that Dr. Xumuc had accomplices positioned strategically around Mount Infernus's crater explained how such precise control over the volcanic eruption was possible. These were not primitive ritualists using ancient magic. They were highly trained technicians using sophisticated equipment to manipulate a volcanic system that had been engineered for control over many centuries. The combination of traditional knowledge and modern technology created a level of power that bordered on the supernatural. Carlos Mendoza studied Dr. Xumuc's ceremonial elements with the recognition of someone familiar with traditional indigenous practices. "You are not just a scientist," Carlos observed. "You are a descendant of the original priesthood that built this system. Your family has been the guardians of Mount Infernus for generations, maintaining the artificial controls while hiding their existence from the outside world." "Very perceptive, Mr. Mendoza," Dr. Xumuc replied, his attention now focused on a handheld device that appeared to be monitoring and controlling various aspects of the eruption. "My lineage traces back to the engineers who first modified this volcanic system in the 13th century. We have maintained our responsibility for 800 years, protecting the world from Mount Infernus's true destructive potential while harvesting its power for beneficial purposes." Marcus's enhanced perception suddenly provided him with a crucial insight about the electronic control system that Dr. Xumuc was using to manage the eruption. The device operated on specific electromagnetic frequencies that interfered with the natural patterns Marcus had been unconsciously learning to read. More importantly, his months of adaptation to the mountain signals had given him the ability to disrupt those control frequencies through focused mental effort, a capability that neither Dr. Xumuc nor his accomplices anticipated. Marcus whispered to Elena, "They weren't random. The mountain has been training me to interface with its control systems. I think I can disrupt their equipment." Elena's eyes widened with understanding and desperate hope. If you can break their control, the eruption might revert to natural patterns that we could predict and potentially escape from. But Marcus, the mental effort required could be dangerous. We don't know what kind of neurological stress this would place on your brain. The armored Mercedes-Benz that delivered Rosa Martinez to the Blackwood estate moved through the crowd of reporters and photographers like a shark cutting through churning water. Elena pressed her face against the bulletproof glass of the living room window, watching as her aunt emerged from the vehicle with the assistance of 2 security guards. Rosa was smaller than Elena remembered, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a simple bun, her weathered hands clutching a black purse that had seen better days. At 58, she looked every year of her age, worn down by decades of cleaning houses and raising 5 children on wages that barely covered rent and groceries. Sofia and Svela flanked Elena as they watched their aunts approach. All 3, sisters silent with the weight of questions that had been building since Harrison Sterling's ominous parting words. What did he know about their mother that they didn't? What secrets had Carmen taken to her grave that could still reach out to destroy the family she'd tried so hard to protect? Rosa Martinez was the only person left alive who had known Carmen. Before she became a mother, before she became consumed with the singular mission of raising her daughters alone, Richard Blackwood stood behind his daughters, his jaw clenched with the tension of a man preparing for battle. The past 18 hours had been a masterclass in corporate warfare, with his legal team fielding attacks from multiple directions, while his security specialists worked to identify and neutralize threats to his family's safety. The Blackwood industry stock had stabilized somewhat, but the board was growing increasingly nervous about the personal scandal affecting their CEO's ability to lead the company through what was shaping up to be the crisis of his career. Rosa entered the foyer with the uncertain steps of someone who had never walked on marble floors or seen crystal chandeliers that cost more than her annual income. Her dark eyes, so similar to Carmen's that Elena felt her breath catch swept over the opulent surroundings, with a mixture of awe and suspicion. She was dressed in her best black dress, the one she wore to church on Sundays and special occasions. But even her finest clothes looked shabby against the backdrop of Richard's wealth. "Mijos," Rosa said softly, opening her arms to embrace her nieces. The Spanish endearment carried the weight of shared grief and familiar love, a reminder of the world they'd left behind in their journey to claim their birthright. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged her aunt, inhaling the familiar scent of vanilla and soap that had been a constant in their childhood when Rosa had helped Carmen raise 3 energetic girls in a cramped apartment. "Tia Rosa," Elena whispered, "we're so glad you're here. Now, we need to ask you about Mama, about things that happened before we were born. It's important." Rosa pulled back, studying her nieces' faces with the shrewd intelligence that had helped her survive 40 years of poverty and struggle. "I figured this day would come eventually," she said quietly. "Your mother, she had secrets that were eating her alive. I told her she should tell you girls the truth, but she was so afraid of what you might think of her." Richard stepped forward, extending his hand in greeting. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Richard Blackwood. I'd want to thank you for coming, and I want you to know that your nieces are incredible young women. Carmen clearly did an amazing job raising them." Rosa studied Richard's face intently, her expression unreadable. "You look just like them," she said finally. "Same eyes, same stubborn chin." Carmen used to say that was her curse. She could never look at her girls without seeing the man who broke her heart. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "I never meant to break her heart," he said quietly. "I didn't even know she was pregnant. If I had known... Rosa's laugh was bitter, carrying decades of suppressed anger. "Shh. Oh, but you did know, Mr. Blackwood. That's the secret your mama took to her grave. You knew about the babies, and you chose." to pretend they didn't exist. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. What do you mean, Tia? Mama said she tried to tell him, but his secretary wouldn't let her see him. She said he was too busy with important people to waste time on him. Maid Rosa shook her head slowly, her weathered face creased with old pain. That's the story she told you because she was too proud to tell you the truth, too ashamed to admit what really happened. Isabella stepped forward, her voice sharp with growing dread. What truth? What really happened? Rosa looked at Richard, then at her nieces, seeming to weigh the cost of revelation against the cost of continued silence. Your mama didn't just work as a housekeeper at the Ritz-Carlton. She was also working as an escort for wealthy men who wanted ... companionship. High class, expensive companionship. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. All the air driven from her lungs by the implications of what her aunt had just revealed. Their mother, the woman who had raised them with such moral certainty, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them fed and clothed, who had sacrificed everything for their welfare, had been selling her body to rich men for money. No, Sophia whispered, her voice breaking. That's not possible. Mama was. She was good. She was moral. She went to church every Sunday. She would never. Rosa's expression softened with sympathy for her niece's shock. Mia, your mama, was 19 years old, alone in a strange city, with no family and no money. She was beautiful, and she was desperate. When men at the hotel offered her more money in one night than she could make in a month cleaning rooms, she made the choice she thought she had to make to survive. Richard's face had gone pale, but his voice was steady when he spoke. She wasn't just a housekeeper when we met. She was. Couldn't finish the sentence, but Rosa nodded grimly. She was working for an escort service that catered to wealthy hotel guests. That's how she met you, Mr. Blackwood. You hired her for 3 nights while you were in Los Angeles for business meetings? Elena felt bile rise in her throat. The romantic story their mother had told them about falling in love with a charming businessman had been a lie built on a foundation of prostitution and transaction.
Ow.
But she said you had an affair that lasted 3 months, she said weakly. She said you cared about each other. Rosa's smile was sad but not unkind. She did see him again after those first 3 nights. But it wasn't romance, Mia. It was business. Your mama fell in love with a client who was paying for her time. I stopped using the service after the first week, Richard said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I kept seeing Carmen because I cared about her, not because I was paying for her company. I gave her money because I knew she needed it. But I thought I was helping someone I cared about, not continuing a business arrangement. His words carried the weight of a man trying to reconcile his memories with a truth that recast everything. Marcus sat quietly in the passenger seat, feeling the gradual normalization of his enhanced perceptions as they moved away from Mount Infernus. The chronic headaches that had plagued him for months were finally beginning to subside, but the ability to sense electromagnetic patterns remained, though in a much milder form. He understood now that his brain had been permanently changed by prolonged exposure to the mountain's artificial control systems, giving him capabilities that no other human possessed. Elena leaned forward from the back seat to place her hand on Marcus's shoulder. You saved our lives today, but more than that, prevented a catastrophic eruption that could have killed thousands of people. Dr. Xumuc was right about one thing. Without proper management, Mount Infernus could be incredibly dangerous. But artificial control systems aren't the answer. We need to find ways to work with natural volcanic processes instead of trying to dominate them. As they reached the main highway and began the journey back to Guatemala City, Carlos shared the final piece of the puzzle that completed their understanding of the day's events. Dr. Xumuc and his people were not evil, he observed, his weathered hands steady on the steering wheel despite everything they had been through. They genuinely believed they were protecting the world from volcanic catastrophe, but they made the mistake of trying to control forces that are meant to be respected and understood, not dominated. The mountain chose Dr. Rivera to break that cycle of control because it recognized someone who could work with volcanic forces instead of against them. The aftermath of their escape from Mount Infernus would prove to have consequences that extended far beyond their personal survival. The photographs, scientific data, eyewitness accounts they brought back challenged fundamental assumptions about volcanic activity and human interaction with geological processes. Universities worldwide launched research programs to investigate other potentially controlled volcanic systems. While indigenous communities shared traditional knowledge that had been dismissed as mythology for centuries, Marcus Rivera returned to his life as a university researcher, but with capabilities and perspectives that no other volcanologist possessed. His enhanced ability to perceive electromagnetic patterns made him invaluable for predicting volcanic activity. His firsthand experience with artificial control systems opened entirely new fields of geological research. The chronic headaches that had nearly driven him to cancel his trip to Mount Infernus became the key to understanding how human consciousness could interface with geological forces under specific conditions. Elena Vasquez published papers documenting the artificial cave systems beneath Mount Infernus that revolutionized archaeological understanding of pre-Columbian civilizations. Her evidence that ancient peoples had possessed sophisticated geological engineering capabilities challenged established timelines of human technological development and opened new avenues for investigating the relationship between traditional knowledge and modern science. James Morrison's photographs from the eruption became some of the most important documentary evidence ever captured of controlled volcanic activity. His prophetic dreams, which had seemed like psychological curiosity before the trip, were now studied as potential evidence that human consciousness could perceive future geological events under certain circumstances. Carlos Mendoza became the bridge between traditional indigenous knowledge and modern volcanic research, helping scientists understand that many supposedly natural geological phenomena had been influenced by human activity over much longer timescales than previously imagined. His family's generations of traditional knowledge about Mount Infernus proved invaluable for developing new approaches to volcanic hazard management. But perhaps the most significant consequence of their experience was the understanding that Mount Infernus itself had been fundamentally changed by the disruption of its artificial control systems. The mountain reverted to natural behavioral patterns for the first time in 8 centuries, creating new opportunities for conventional geological study, while eliminating the threat of artificially triggered catastrophic eruptions. Dr. Alejandro Xumuc and his team disappeared in the chaos of the eruption. Those subsequent investigations suggested they had access to escape routes and emergency protocols that allowed them to survive the reversion to natural volcanic activity. Government authorities launched searches for the group, but the remote mountainous terrain and the traditional knowledge that Dr. Xumuc's people possessed made tracking them nearly impossible. The story of Marcus Rivera's escape from Mount Infernus became more than just an account of survival against impossible odds. It became evidence that human beings possessed capabilities for interacting with geological forces that conventional science had never imagined, and that the boundary between natural and artificial phenomena was far more complex than anyone had previously understood. Years later, when researchers asked Marcus to describe the most important lesson from his experience in the crater of Mount Infernus, his answer was always the same. We learned that the Earth is not just a collection of geological processes operating independently of human consciousness. Under the right circumstances, with the right preparation, human awareness can interface with geological forces in ways that benefit both humanity and the planet itself. But that capability comes with tremendous responsibility, because the power to influence geological processes is also the power to cause catastrophic destruction if used unwisely. The man who escaped from the crater of a deadly volcanic eruption had discovered something far more valuable than mere survival. He had found evidence that human beings and the Earth itself were connected in ways that opened entirely new possibilities for cooperation, understanding, mutual protection, in an age when both human civilization and geological stability faced unprecedented challenges. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and share so others get to watch too. Subscribe for more.